It all started with a job posting that seemed too good to be true. Night cleaner wanted 30 each hour. No experience necessary. Must be able to follow instructions without question. I'd seen enough scams online to know this smelled like a pyramid scheme, or worse. But the pay was too tempting. After getting laid off from the warehouse 3 weeks ago, I wasn't in a position to be picky, so I sent in my resume, figuring I'd give it a shot. I got a reply within the hour, asking me to come for an interview at the Old Crescent Mall Cinema. That movie theater had been forgotten ever since the downtown multiplex opened. The place was weird. There were no flashing movie posters, no glossy banners. The walls were covered in posters for movies nobody had thought about in years, their colors faded and warped from sun and time. The air was a mix of floor wax and dust, with a faint, underlying smell of burnt caramel. The man waiting for me in the lobby introduced himself as Mr. Alden. He wore a neat but dated uniform, a crisply ironed white shirt, and a dark blue vest with a silver manager's nameplate pinned to it. His hair was perfectly in place. His smile, however, was cold, his eyes vacant. "Sean, right?" he asked. I nodded, my throat dry. "You've never worked in a theater before?" "No, but I'm a fast learner." He looked at me like what I'd said was completely irrelevant. "This job isn't about learning. It's about following rules. You follow the rules, you'll be fine." He handed me a laminated sheet of thick plastic, its corners worn down. It was titled Night Staff Notice. There were only 7 rules. After midnight, no matter what you hear, do not enter Theater 6. If Theater 2 is open when you start your shift, lock the door immediately and do not look inside. If someone knocks from inside the emergency exit, do not answer. The concessions stand must be cleaned first. Do not eat anything you find behind the counter. When the intercom plays music, stop all movement and remain still until it's over. There is no Theater 9. If the screen in Theater 4 turns on by itself, take a seat and watch. Do not leave until the movie is over. Is this a joke? I try to force a smile. He said nothing. Cleaning supplies are in the janitor's closet next to Theater 1. Your shift is 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. unless specifically instructed. You are not to enter any of the theaters while a film is playing. There was no onboarding, no HR meeting. He just had me sign a form. I acknowledge and agree to the above rules and write my name and date. The first night was dead quiet. I mopped the sticky tile floors, wiped down the counters, and vacuumed the faded carpets. I followed the rules, trying to avoid the theaters, but I couldn't resist peeking into Theater 3. It was just empty, with rows of worn-out red seats facing a blank screen. Nothing out of the ordinary. At 5:45 a.m., I threw on my coat, grabbed my keys, and headed back to the lobby. Mr. Alden was nowhere to be seen. I locked up and went home. The second night was much the same, but something was off. When I arrived, the door to Theater 2 was open. I remembered the rule, locked it immediately, and didn't look inside. A faint blue light pulsed from the crack under the door, flickering like a dying fluorescent bulb. Suddenly, I heard something scrape across the floor inside. I held my breath, took a deep one, and pulled the door shut, my hand trembling as I gripped the handle. By the third night, I was thinking about quitting. Nothing dramatic had happened, but it just felt wrong. Time moved strangely here, the clocks on the wall never seemed to be right, and I constantly felt like someone was watching me from around a corner. At 3:22 a.m., the intercom crackled to life, and then came the music. Not normal music, but a distorted lullaby, slow and broken, like an ice cream truck playing underwater. I froze, the mop slipping from my hands and clattering on the wet tiles. The sound wasn't loud, but it filled the entire space. As the rule stated, I stood perfectly still. A minute, then 2. The music stopped, replaced by a soft static hum. I let out a breath and sank to the floor, my body weak. After that, I didn't do much cleaning. By the end of the first week, I understood. These weren't suggestions, they were lifelines. That was the night I heard the knocking. I was taking out the trash, heading toward the emergency exit in the back hallway. The building was supposed to be empty. I checked every room myself. And then it came. One knock, then a second, then a third. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound came from the emergency exit, the one that was only supposed to be used in a fire. But the sound wasn't muffled. It was sharp and clear, as if the knocking wasn't coming from through the door, but from the other side of the hallway. "Hello?" A voice whispered. I didn't answer. "Can you hear me? Please help me. I'm locked in," a young woman's voice said, full of desperation. "Please, don't leave me here." My feet were rooted to the spot, my hands clenched into fists. Every instinct screamed to me to open that door, but I didn't. Because something was wrong. The emergency exit didn't have a handle, only a push bar. It could only be opened from the inside. Whoever was knocking couldn't have gotten in that way. Then, she said my name. "Sean, please, I know you're there. I can feel you." In that moment, I turned and ran. The next day, Mr. Alden had left a note for me, folded on my cleaning card. It was written in neat handwriting. "Good. You listened. Not everyone does. Well done. Remember, these rules are here to protect you." No signature, no further explanation. Just confirmation. Yes, the knocking was real. Yes, I was being tested. And yes, these rules were more than just words on a laminated sheet of paper. They were a survival guide. By the start of the second week, I understood that this cinema wasn't just old and forgotten. It was a crack in reality, hiding in plain sight. It operated on rules that weren't just strange, they were sacred, etched into the walls. Breaking them wasn't grounds for dismissal. It was a death sentence. Despite all this, I stayed. I like to tell you it was bravery, but that would be a lie. It was just rent, utilities, the $63 left in my bank account, and the maxed out credit card. No matter how weird this job was, no matter how strange the rules, I needed it more than I feared it. Or so I thought at the time. One night during the second week, I met Harper. I'd arrived earlier than usual, expecting the theater to be empty, as always. But the lobby wasn't quiet. Someone was sitting on the concessions counter, legs swinging casually. She was wearing a red Crescent Cinema hoodie that was clearly several sizes too big for her. Her hair was a mess of chestnut curls, tangled and wild, as if she'd just stepped out of a wind tunnel. She didn't look like she belonged here, but there she was. "You must be the new guy," she said casually, her voice completely unguarded, as if we were meeting in a coffee shop and not a dead silent, cursed movie theater. "Sean," I said, utterly confused. "Harper, I work here too. On and off. Mostly off. How come I haven't seen you?" She grinned. "Because I only come in when the rules change." That sentence hit my stomach like a cold stone. The rules change? You mean that list isn't permanent? Harper hopped off the counter and walked toward me. "No, Sean. The rules grow. They react. They punish. And sometimes they warn." I was about to ask more, but she pointed down the hallway. "Tonight, you have to check Theater 7. That's not on the list. It is now." The hallway to Theater 7 seemed longer than usual. Each step felt like I was walking down a tunnel, not a normal corridor. The lights above me flickered, one of them dimming for a moment, nearly plunging me into darkness. Harper was gone. No explanation, no goodbye. One moment she was beside me. The next the hallway was empty, filled only with a deepening silence. I stood before the door to Theater 7. I half expected it to be hot to the touch or humming with an unnatural energy, but it was just cold and lifeless. Just a door. I slowly pushed it open, not knowing what I was supposed to be looking for. The theater was pitch black. Not the usual darkness of a movie theater, but an abyssal nothingness. The beam from my flashlight was almost swallowed whole, like a matchstick in a cave. I crossed the threshold, taking one step, then another. Nothing happened. The empty seats were lined up neatly, the screen as blank as ever. I held my breath, ready to turn and leave. The screen flickered once, let out a burst of static, and then went still. I didn't look back. I retreated, walking fast. That night, I found a new rule on my cleaning cart, laminated in the same font. Rule 8. Do not enter Theater 7 unless instructed. If you do, and the screen flickers, you must leave immediately. Do not wait for a second flicker. The screen hadn't flickered a second time. I sat on a bench in the lobby, staring at the paper. The rules really were changing. The theater was watching. It was learning. And somehow, that was even more terrifying. On Thursday, I broke a rule. It wasn't on purpose. That's what I keep telling myself. But does it really matter? It was 4:15 a.m. I just finished the restrooms and was walking past Theater 4 when I saw the door was slightly ajar. I peered inside. The screen was on. A grainy, sepia-toned film was playing on a loop. A man sat at a table in a small, gray kitchen. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting there, staring straight ahead, blinking occasionally. The only sound was a low electronic hum. I froze. Rule 7. If the screen in Theater 4 turns on by itself, take a seat and watch. Do not leave until the movie is over. My feet follow my brain's command before I could stop them. I walked into the theater and chose a seat in the very middle. The door clicked shut behind me. The man on the screen remained motionless. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Nothing changed. Then, the man on the screen turned his head. He wasn't looking at something in the kitchen. He was looking directly at me. It wasn't a glitch, not some cinematic trick. His eyes cut through the grain and static of the film and locked onto mine. I felt his gaze like a needle in my spine. He smiled, then he stood up. I don't remember much after that. My vision blurred. My limbs went rigid. I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. It was as if he was stepping out of the screen, one frame at a time, getting closer. When I woke up, I was in the lobby. The sun was rising. My phone was dead. My shoes were gone. There was a note taped to the counter. You left too early. Do better next time. And below it, a simple addendum. Rule 9. If the figure on the screen stands up, do not look away. Do not close your eyes. Do not move. By the weekend, I'd stopped trying to rationalize any of this. I didn't look up the theater online. I didn't try to track down Mr. Alden and demand answers. I didn't tell my roommate, who probably thought I was just cleaning toilets or being a night watchman in an empty office building. Some truths aren't meant to be spoken. On Saturday, Harper appeared again. This time she was sitting cross-legged on the floor of Theater 5. No lights, no movie. Just her and the stale, heavy air. You watched it, didn't you? She asked, not looking at me. Not all of it, I replied. She nodded. It'll keep showing up then, in different places, on different screens. It wants you to finish it. What happens if I do? She tilted her head. No one knows. How do you know all this? She didn't answer. She just stood up and walked away. Her footsteps made no sound. I was alone again. 2 nights later, I saw the man again in the reflection of the popcorn machine. He was standing behind me, pale and expressionless. I didn't turn around. I just lowered my gaze, took a few steps back, and walked away. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just followed a rule that hadn't been written down yet, but that I knew in my gut. If you see him outside the screen, ignore him. I left early that night. Around 5:30, my work unfinished. There was no punishment. Instead, there was a new rule on my card. Rule 10. If you see the figure from Theater 4 elsewhere in the cinema, do not engage. Do not speak. Do not acknowledge it. By the end of the second week, I knew I was in too deep. I started dreaming in the colors of the theater, the dusty reds, the velvety blacks, the tarnished gold trim. I'd wake up to the phantom hum of a distant projector or the soft rustle of popcorn. But my room would be silent. I could feel myself changing. My nerves weren't my own anymore. The fear wasn't about ghosts or monsters anymore. It had become a pattern, an awareness. The theater wasn't haunted. It was aware, and it was starting to notice me. There's a point in this job where the fear stops being loud. It no longer screams in your ear or makes your legs buckle every time a light flickers. It becomes a quiet thing, like the stale air in a sealed room. A slow, constant pressure that reminds you, you do not belong here. That was my 3rd week. No jump scares, no violent encounters. Just the building itself breathing deeper, its gaze tightening. The rules didn't just change. They started responding to me. On Monday, I found a notebook in my locker. I didn't put it there. No one had mentioned it. It had a black leather cover, no title, and was strangely warm to the touch. I opened it. Inside, written in red ink, was a single rule. Rule 11. When your shadow no longer follows your movements, go back to Theater 1, sit in the front row, and do not turn around. It wasn't laminated. It had no official stamp. It was just a hastily scrawled reminder from someone whose memory was already fading. I closed the book, shoved it to the back of the locker, and tried to forget it. I should have taken it more seriously. Around 2 a.m., I noticed something was wrong. I was sweeping by the concession stand, a familiar, calming motion back and forth. But suddenly, the rhythm fell off a half beat behind. I looked down, my shadow wasn't moving. I blinked, then swept again. My arms moved, my body moved, but my shadow was frozen in mid-air, caught in time. Then, as if suddenly catching up, it jerked violently like a puppet on clumsy strings. The broom fell from my hands. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to burst out of the lobby, to breathe free air, to see the wind and the streetlights and hear the sound of traffic. But the notebook flashed in my mind, Rule 11. I went to Theater 1. The room was empty, cold, and dead silent, the kind of quiet you find in a basement, where even sound is afraid to move. I sat in the front row. The lights slowly dimmed behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. The door clicked shut. I don't know how long I sat there. I tried counting in my head, maybe got past 600. Eventually, I stopped focusing on time and just waited for the presence behind me to go away. It made no sound, didn't approach, but I could feel it watching me. The feeling was like cold fingers pressing into the back of my neck. Finally, the lights came up. I stood. My shadow moved perfectly with me. The notebook was gone. My locker was empty. On Wednesday, Harper was back. She looked worse this time, pale, trembling, with dark circles under her eyes, like she hadn't slept in days. She didn't say hello, just sat on the bench by the lost and found cabinet and stared at the floor. "Are you okay?" I asked. She slowly shook her head. He started writing again. "Who?" "The projectionist." I didn't understand what that meant, and I didn't ask. It felt like something I shouldn't know. She looked up, her eyes too wide. "Don't open the lost and found tonight. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, don't open it. What's in there?" "Memories," she whispered. "The pieces of people who didn't follow the rules." I wanted to laugh it off, but I couldn't. I remember the bag that moved in the trash chute last week. The scream that had followed. I nodded. "Okay, I won't open it." At 3:03 a.m., the cabinet began to shake. It wasn't a loud noise, but it was sharp and grating, like something with fingernails was scratching at the inside. Then a voice. "Sean, you dropped your keys." I felt my pocket. My keys were there. "Don't leave me in here." The voice was mine. Not similar, not an imitation. It was my voice, my tone, my pitch, my cadence. Exactly. I backed away, a chilling coldness numbing my legs. The cabinet door rattled harder. "Don't you want to see what you've lost?" I turned and walked away without looking back. I cleaned the rest of the lobby in silence, avoiding that side of the room as if it were radioactive. In the morning, a new rule was posted by the light switch. Rule 12. If the lost and found speaks to you, ignore it. What's inside no longer belongs to you. On Thursday night, the projector in Theater 6 turned on by itself. That wasn't the strange part anymore. The strange part was that it wasn't playing a movie. It was a home video. The footage was grainy, shot on an old camcorder, shakily pointed at a birthday party. Balloons, streamers, a cake on the table. A little boy was blowing out the candles as people clapped and cheered. The boy looked familiar. It was me. I stood frozen at the back of the theater. The camera panned around the room, capturing my childhood home. My parents, my sister, laughing and alive, untouched by time. The footage flickered for a second. The lights flashed. The screen jumped. When it settled, the party was gone. The room in the video was empty, the set decayed. The walls were cracked, the balloons were shriveled husks, and the cake was covered in flies. In the corner, a figure stood with its back to the camera. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I turned and left. On Friday, Harper didn't show up. On the old employee roster by the office door, her name had been crossed out with a red marker. I asked Mr. Alden about her. He blinked. "Who?" "Harper." She said she worked here. He frowned slightly, his gaze drifting past me toward the hallway. "There hasn't been an employee named Harper here since 2016. What happened to her?" "She broke a rule." "Which one?" He gave me a look that made me freeze. It was a look that wasn't written down in any rule book. That night, I was alone. The whole building seemed colder, the air heavier. The rules no longer felt like guidelines. They felt like a countdown. Near the end of my shift, the lobby lights suddenly dimmed. A low hum filled the air, like static crawling over glass. I turned and saw my reflection in the glass of the ticket booth. It wasn't moving. I took a step back. The real me moved. The reflection remained perfectly still. Then slowly it smiled. Not a smirk, not a twitch. A wide, impossibly broad grin that split its face. Its teeth were sharp as razors, its eyes wide and monstrous. I blinked, and the image was gone. No sound, no movement. Just my own terrified face staring back at me. There was no rule for this. I went home early. I didn't clock out. I didn't leave a note. When I came back the next night, there was a new note on my card. Rule 13. If your reflection smiles on its own, leave immediately. You are not alone. By the end of the third week, I wasn't afraid of dying anymore. I was afraid of being remembered by this place, of being etched into the walls, the screens, the cursed and hidden rooms, of becoming another piece of footage, another whisper in the dark, another one of the rules. Because the longer I stayed, the clearer it became. This place didn't just punish rule breakers. It kept them. By the fourth week, the theater stopped pretending. I could navigate the hallways with my eyes closed now. The rules weren't just rules, they were second nature. I knew when to stop, when not to look back, when to sit down and wait for the movie to end, no matter what was screaming behind my seat. I knew how to tell if the voice calling my name from the other side of a locked door was real or not. I had learned how to survive, but survival was no longer enough. The theater wanted more. The changes started subtly. The walls began to move, not a violent shaking or groan. They shifted slowly, like a wandering thought. I'd walk past theater 3 one moment, and it would be theater 5 next. A hallway I'd just come down would disappear when I looked back, replaced by a service corridor that hadn't been used in years. Doors that had been bricked up were suddenly open. The signs flickered between English and languages I didn't recognize. One night, I was standing by the concession stand, and the air suddenly smelled of salt and seawater. Another time, it was the smell of rot. And once, I could have sworn the popcorn machine wasn't filled with popcorn, but with rows and rows of human teeth. The notebook returned. The black cover, the warm leather. It was just sitting on the stool in the projection booth, waiting for me. I opened it. 3 new rules were scrawled inside in a rushed script. Rule 14. If the name of a movie you've dreamed about appears on the marquee outside, do not enter that theater. Rule 15. If the projector in theater 1 shows you the future, do not tell anyone what you see. Rule 16. If you see yourself in the building, leave immediately. One of you is not supposed to be there. I tried to tell Mr. Alden about the walls moving. He just nodded slowly, saying, "It does that sometimes." "And that doesn't worry you?" I asked. He sighed. "The theater isn't a place, Sean. It's an agreement. One we break more often than we think." An agreement with who? He didn't answer, turning back to the old film reels stacked behind his desk. On Friday, I broke Rule 14. I didn't mean to. I didn't even realize it until I was already inside. The door to Theater 8 was open, and a gentle piano melody drifted out, hypnotic and heavy like a blanket. I walked in without thinking. On the screen was my apartment. Not just any view of it, but the one I saw every morning when I first woke up. The bed, the fan that always clicked because I never got around to tightening it, the faded poster in the corner of the wall. And there was someone in the bed, me. I turned to leave, but the door was gone. There was only a wall. I backed away, my breath coming in short, panic bursts, my heart a drum. On the screen, the figure in the bed moved. He reached for the phone on the nightstand and answered it. There had been no ring, no conversation, but he nodded as if listening. Then it turned to the screen and smiled. I blinked and the lights went out. I woke up alone in Theater 3. No movie, no sound. I pulled out my phone. 6 missed calls, all from my own number. On Saturday night, Mr. Alden was in his office. The light was on, but the room was empty. His desk was clear. The box where he kept the rules was open and empty. His jacket was gone. No note, no sign of struggle. Just a void where he should have been. I searched the entire building, from the projection booths to the storage closets, through theaters 1 through 8. He wasn't there, but Theater 9 was. You remember Rule 7, right? There is no Theater 9. At the end of the east corridor, where the broom closet used to be, there was now a large black door. The number 9 was painted on it in wet, white paint. I didn't touch it. I just stared. From behind the door, I could hear a slow, deep, deliberate breath. I went back to the lobby and saw Harper. I hadn't seen her in over a week. She looked exhausted, her eyes hollow. "You found it," she said. "Theater 9. She nodded. "It wasn't supposed to open. Where's Mr. Alden?" I asked. She looked down the hall. "He made a deal." "What kind of deal?" She didn't answer. Instead, she handed me an iron film canister. It was rusted and corroded at the edges. "Play this in Theater 5 at midnight. Don't stop it. Don't leave. After it's over, you'll know what to do." I wanted to argue, but she was already gone. Midnight came too fast. I stood in the projection booth of Theater 5, my fingers trembling as I loaded the film. The machine whirred to life, the film clattered through the sprockets, and the screen flickered on. The footage was from a security camera, grainy and black and white. The theater lobby was empty, dead silent. Suddenly, a figure appeared. Not me from last week, or me from earlier that night. It was me, right now, walking past a camera that didn't exist. The feed cut. The break room. There I was again, sitting at the table, eating from a plastic container. It cut again. The projection booth. I was standing in front of the projector, staring at the screen. I looked up and saw myself watching myself. My heart slammed into my ribs. I backed away from the projector. The air in the booth grew thick. A low, static hum buzzed in my ears. From the hallway outside came a heavy, familiar, determined footstep. I shut off the projector. The lights died instantly. Somehow I was back in the lobby. The screens on the walls weren't playing trailers anymore. They were playing me. Every mistake, every broken rule, every single moment I failed to follow instructions. I saw myself searching the lost and found. I saw myself closing my eyes while watching the film in Theater 4. I saw the moment my shadow lagged behind. And then I saw Mr. Alden. He was standing inside Theater 9, his hands raised. A dark figure loomed over him. It wasn't human, not entirely. It was more like a shape from a tear in reality. Its face was a blur, like an old film reel spinning at high speed. He said something. The film had no sound. The screen went black. Text appeared. Rule 17. Once Theater 9 is open, a manager must be offered. A sob echoed through the lobby. I followed the sound down the hall. Harper was huddled against the wall, her head in her hands, weeping. "It took him," she whispered. "He thought sacrificing himself would seal the door. But it's never satisfied with just one. What does it want?" She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "It wants an audience." That night, I dreamed of a theater filled with an infinite number of seats. They were all occupied. The figures didn't move, their eyes wide and expressionless. They were all staring at me. I was standing center stage. There was no script, no lines. Just a single, hot spotlight burning down on me. Behind me, a door slowly creaked open. The number 9 was carved into it in blood red. I woke up screaming. The notebook was on my pillow. This time, there was only one rule written inside. Rule 18. There must always be a show. I didn't go to work that night. I didn't clock in. I didn't call. I just sat in my apartment with all the lights on, clutching my phone. At midnight, the TV turned on by itself. No remote, no signal, just static. Then my face. Then the theater. Then Theater 9 waiting. For the next 3 nights, I didn't go to the theater. Every night at midnight, my TV would turn on, fizzing with static. Then the image would resolve into a single, still frame of Theater 9. Always that door. Never opening, never closing. Just waiting. My phone started vibrating constantly with calls from unknown numbers. No voicemails, just missed calls from area codes that didn't exist. I tried to sleep, I tried to eat, but the theater was already under my skin. I wasn't living anymore. I was just waiting. On the 4th night, I found a flyer taped to my apartment door. It was old, yellowed paper, printed with the theater's old logo, one they hadn't used since the 80s. It read, "Tonight only. Final showing. Doors at midnight." And scrawled underneath, in messy handwriting, "Bring the notebook. Don't be late." I hadn't seen the notebook since the last rule appeared, but when I turned around, it was sitting on my kitchen table. It was open to a blank page, a pen lying beside it. I picked it up and walked out without locking the door. I had a feeling I wouldn't be needing it again. When I arrived, the theater was lit up. Not just the lobby lights, but a soft, golden glow emanated from the windows of every single theater, like a beating heart behind a glass. The air smelled of ash and candy, a sweetness that had long since burned and couldn't be saved. Harper was waiting inside. She didn't speak, just nodded toward the east corridor, then turned and walked away. I wanted to stop her to ask if this was the end or the beginning, but the finality in her steps told me everything I needed to know. She would not be here when it was over. The door to Theater 9 was wide open. There was no number on it anymore. The paint had blistered and peeled away, leaving a void. Inside, the darkness was deeper and wider than the building should have been able to contain. The seats had become a hallway. There was no screen, no rows of chairs, just a path of deep red carpet that disappeared into the black. I stepped inside. The door closed behind me. The hallway twisted and warped. At times it looked like the backstage of a playhouse, with ropes and scaffolding hanging from above. Other times it was a tunnel behind a projection booth, narrow and dense with the smell of chemicals. I swear at one point I walked through my childhood bedroom. The faded glow and the dark stars still stuck to the ceiling, as if time had folded it on itself. It all flickered like a rapidly changing channel. The notebook was in my hand the whole time. The pages turned on their own, sometimes showing text, sometimes drawings. One page depicted the lobby as I'd first seen it. The next showed the same room years from now, overgrown with vines, rotting and mottled. Another page had only one sentence. You are both the actor and the stage. Eventually, the hallway opened into a massive auditorium, far larger than any building in this city could hold. Red velvet seats stretched out like an ocean, and every single one was filled. I couldn't see their faces, just silent silhouettes, watching. A stage light flickered on, illuminating Mr. Alden in the center of the stage. He looked tired, older, his eyes sunken, his hands trembling slightly. But when he saw me, a sad, proud smile touched his lips. "You came," he said. "I had no choice. None of us ever did," I replied. He held out his hand. I gave him the notebook. He turned to the last page. He carefully handed the pen back to me. "Write the last rule." I looked down at the blank page, my hand shaking. "Write what?" Mr. Alden stepped back into the shadows. "What did you learn? What has to happen next? This is your theater now." I wanted to scream questions at him, but it was no use. The audience was waiting. I bent down and wrote, the pen impossibly heavy. I wrote the 19th rule. When the curtain rises, the show must go on, even if you forget your lines. The moment the pen left the paper, the stage lights flared blindingly bright. The notebook burned in my hands, turning to ash that drifted through my fingers. The audience applauded, a rhythmic, calm, and uniform sound. The curtain rose. What happened next is hard to describe. It wasn't a performance, not really. It was more like a memory. It was a series of moments I never realized I'd forgotten. Childhood fears, adolescent mistakes. Every promise I'd ever broken. Every lie I'd ever told. It all played out on the stage. I was wearing costumes I'd never seen before, speaking lines I'd never memorized. But I knew exactly what was coming next. This wasn't a story. It was a confession. The audience was motionless. Their gazes were locked, their breath held. When I stood alone in the pale spotlight at the end, I finally understood. This was an audition, not to leave, but to stay. The lights went out. The silence was mountainous, suffocating. Then, slowly, the applause began. One clap, then another, slow and steady. Like the first few drops of a heavy rain. The figures rose to their feet. Their clapping hands never quite touched. The sound of their applause wasn't quite real. Mr. Alden walked onto the stage and stood beside me. He looked out at the audience, then back at me. "They've accepted," he said. "Accepted what?" I asked. "You, as the new manager." I shook my head. I hadn't agreed to this. I hadn't volunteered. He put a hand on my shoulder. "You performed. You wrote the rule. That's the agreement." The stage creaked beneath my feet. The audience began to dissipate. Their forms dissolved into static, rising like smoke into the rafters. Mr. Alden was starting to fade, too. "What now?" I asked. "Now, you guard the door. You follow the rules. And you write them. Wait, I don't even know how. He smiled. You didn't then, either. And then he was gone. I woke up in the office. Mr. Alden's desk, his chair. The old clock still ticking steadily on the wall. The keys were in my pocket. The first shift would begin in an hour. The cleaning cart was restocked. On the desk was a new notebook. Black leather cover. The first page was blank. And on the desk was a single note. It read, Rule 1. Never let them know you're afraid. They can smell it. I leaned back in a chair, took a deep breath, and waited for the first knock on the door.